As Jesus' ministry moves on, he's asked all kinds of questions. Some are meant as traps to pave the way for his destruction. Some are self-serving questions intended to bolster the status of the questioner. Some are real questions from those on a journey toward spiritual understanding. The disciples come to Jesus asking what is perhaps a legit or perhaps a self-serving question: who is the greatest in God's reign? Since disagreement about status is common in communities, this concern should not surprise us. Some of us get preoccupied over who is the greatest in the group. Somehow we seem to need to have a pecking order and to know just where we stand in the list. Of course, in God's pecking order, sometimes things get turned upside down, and we're beginning to learn with Jesus, questioners often get more than they bargained for. So calling a young child to stand among this gathered group of adults who are waiting for an answer, Jesus says, the ones who yield their importance to someone else, the ones who give up their more prestigious positions, taking on a lower status along with the treatment that comes with that lower status, the ones who take on the status of a child, these are the ones who are greatest in the community of God. Jesus also says, the truth is this: unless you change, unless you become like a little child, you won't even enter heaven. Don't bother worrying about who's the greatest. You're not even going to get in through the gate. Now note, Jesus doesn't say, God might not be happy with you. Jesus doesn't say, it's possible you may not get to be with God. Jesus doesn't say, it could be a good idea to try this thing out. Jesus says, here's the truth. Unless you change, unless you're converted, unless you're transformed, becoming like a little child, you will not even enter into God's new community. You will not be one of the people of God. You will not be part of this new thing God is doing. Unless you change to become like a little child, it's not just you won't ever get to be the greatest, you're not even going to get in. So to be Jesus' disciple, we have to become like a small child. Now at this point, we may be thinking of the fun, carefree days of childhood and think, this isn't such a bad idea, I kind of like this. Or we may be thinking about difficult times in childhood and not want to go there again. In Jesus' day, childhood was extremely difficult and dangerous. Children were the weakest members of society. 50% died before the age of 5. They were fed last, received the smallest portions, and were given the poorest food. Children in Jesus' day were the first to suffer from famine and war, disease, and natural disasters. Some think that by puberty, more than 70% would have lost one or both of their parents. As a minor in society, children have the same status as a slave, and only in adulthood became free persons. So when Jesus tells his disciples to become like children, we're confronted again with Matthew's radical view of discipleship. These men, at least presumably they were men, are to renounce their privilege as adult men, the guys at the top of the social ladder, and instead become some of the most vulnerable people in society. On the surface, it looks like being a child is risky business, unprotected from the real dangers lurking out there at the bottom of the social structure, where few resources were available until when and if you made it to adulthood. Why would anyone, at least in Jesus' day, ever consent to becoming like a child? Perhaps just this. In this extreme vulnerability, it is the children who, according to Jesus, are God's people, the ones on the inside track, the ones who are continually watched over by God, the ones who know some things that the rest of us may not know. The child has a power we more sophisticated grown-ups often have lost. The power of telling it like it is. The power of seeing things we adults do not see and having the ability to tell us about it, uninhibited by what others will think, unhindered by layers and layers of rationalizing filters to check it out, analyzing to death whatever it is until it has lost all meaning. They have the power of openness to the wonder of life in every dimension, and maybe, just maybe, are more open to the spiritual realities in our midst.